This morning we're taking a bus to Prague, in the Czech Republic. But first we're heading over to the train station, where we're each having a satisfying hot ham and egg sandwich for breakfast, before meeting our bus at 9:15. It was a relaxing 3-hour and 45-minute ride through the countryside, before being dropped off in the city. We're staying at the Charles Hotel, in the Little Quarter, at the foot of the picturesque Charles Bridge. The bridge is the centerpiece of Prague, lined with its many statues, including those of Saint Vitus, the patron saint of the Czech Republic. Our first destination for the day is on the other side of the bridge, a boat tour on the Vltava River. It's a short cruise, just under an hour, and leaves from a dock underneath the St. Charles Bridge. We were served a drink and a small snack before heading out onto the Vltava River, which runs through the center of Prague. Besides passing under the St. Charles Bridge, we also passed by a few canals and under the Mains Bridge. Toward the end of the cruise, they showed us pictures of how high the water got during the last big flood of 2002. We're now on our way to Prague's Old Town Square for a tour of the old town's Romanesque and Gothic underground cellars and dungeons. Our tour guide is Veronica, and she starts out by telling us about how a lot of the buildings have been rebuilt using facadism.
It started in France in 70s, and it is when you let the old part of a building and then you completely destroy the rest. So this is quite popular here in Prague, because this is when you, again, as I said, you keep the front, the old part, and then you modernize the building. Honestly, I don't know what is my opinion on that, because on one hand, we're kind of recycling the building, we're giving it a second life.
She explains that since the city has always been prone to flooding, starting in the Middle Ages, channels were dug and the dirt piled against buildings, burying the first floors, creating multi-level cellars.
But during the 2002 flood, Prague Zoo was completely under the water, and we had to put down, kill a lot of these animals because they would drown. But then the last one was in 2013, and they were approximately same in height as the 2002 flood. In the early 70s, the old town was like a regular port of Prague. There were trams and buses going all around it. So these buildings were pretty much in bad shape because of the traffic and the people, and because it wasn't really taken as a historical, as a historical part, as something that should be protected. So, these buildings, they were damaged, and government, they were doing absolutely nothing about it. Yeah, so it wasn't great. So people like me and you, they had to rebuild and reconstruct their houses by themselves. But they usually didn't have the skill or the material to do so. So they messed up even more than was, necessary. So, after 60s and early 70s, the government, they were kind of pressured into this position of, we will save it. We will save it all. This cellar and the last one, they were part of a brewery in the 17th century. Now, this cellar was used as a storage room for the beer, and the last cellar was used as a pub. Actually, how it ended here, the brewery, they were doing a very bad beer, which is kind of like a crime here in the Czech lands. So he was very, punished for that.
We are finding out that there's quite a few hidden laboratories throughout Prague, since alchemy was promoted by Emperor Rudolf II, who was obsessed with finding an elixir for eternal life. This laboratory was hidden behind a bookcase and even has its own golem for protection.
It's like a DIY thing. Anyone can do it. So yeah, I asked a gentleman, and he was asking me if he can do some exercising on it. And I was like, but now, as I said, the beer was very bad. So the only thing they were torturing people here with was the beer. So we made it into a torture room. Ladies and gentlemen, I would love to present you the Wheel of Misfortunate. So who will be the lucky, unlucky one to start? Do we have a volunteer here? That was pretty quick, by the way. Now give it a good spin. Ooh, what is it? What is it? What is it? What is it? Okay, I think this is the rats.
Rats.
Oh, that's the nastiest one out of them all. I'm sorry. No, the rat is when they put a bucket or a cage with a rat inside, they put it on your stomach, then they lit a fire, and they were doing all of these moves around the rat. So the rat started to panic, and it was literally eating its way out of you.
On that note, we're heading for dinner at a restaurant called Local. We're both having beef shin goulash with dumplings. We sat with a couple traveling together, Raj from India and Victoria from Kiev. We talked on many topics, from politics to living with the war in Ukraine to philosophy and marriage. Back at the hotel, we fall asleep looking at the ceiling above our bed. Today we're heading up toward the Prague Castle. But first we have breakfast in the beautifully decorated breakfast room at the hotel. We walk up the path called the Old Castle Stairs. After buying tickets, we start our visit at St. George's Basilica. This church, originally founded around the year 920, has gone through many renovations over the years, with the last being as late as 1975. This is the Gothic Vladislav Hall in the Royal Palace. From the 16th century, this hall served as a location for royal state occasions such as coronation festivities, banquets, and tournaments. Adjacent to the hall is the Office of the Land Rolls, a place where both records of land ownership and court decisions were kept. The ceilings and walls of this room are covered with hundreds of the coat of arms of these landowners, creating a unique visual history. The centerpiece of the castle grounds is the majestic St. Vitus Cathedral. Its construction began in 1344 and took almost 6 centuries to complete. It's 287 steps to reach the observation deck of the South Tower. On the way up, we pass a number of bells, including the Sigismund bell, which is the largest bell in the Czech Republic. Because of its size, it takes 6 people to ring it, and is only rung on special occasions, like Christmas and Easter. Once at the top, you get an interesting view of the original clockworks, but these don't actually ring the bells. But the real reason for making the trek up the tower are the wonderful views. Our final stop is the Golden Lane, a series of small dwellings built into the defensive walls of the castle. These have been restored, showing various shops, including herbalists, dressmakers, and goldsmiths. An interesting note: birds were often kept by the goldsmiths as an early warning device, since they worked with dangerous fumes. Above the shops, in the second floor of the defensive walls, are displays of armors and weapons used throughout the ages. And what castle wouldn't be complete without a dungeon and torture chamber? Well, we're hungry, and as usual, it's well after 3 o'clock, and they've stopped serving lunch, and too early for dinner service. So we bought a couple of glasses of hot spiced wine to tide us over. Thinking we'd have a better chance of finding something to eat in Old Town, we arrived in time to see the display of the astronomical clock. In the square we heard music, and a rally was beginning. There were a lot of Israeli flags, and signs saying Holocaust 2023 will never forget. This being the 1-year anniversary of Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel. There was a fair amount of street food around, but we were in the mood for something a little more substantial. We ended up at one of the few open places, an Irish pub, where we had a very tasty meal of salmon and fish and chips. There are 2 St. Nicholas churches in Prague, one in Lesser Town around the corner from our hotel, and this one in Old Town. Both churches are a beautiful example of Baroque architecture, and both were designed by the same architect. This St. Nicholas church was originally built in the 1300s in the Gothic style, but was rebuilt in the Baroque style after it was destroyed in a fire in 1689. As we left Old Town Square, we came across one of David Cerny's unusual sculptures, this one called Man Hanging Out, depicting Sigmund Freud. These 2 giant sculptures, also by David Cerny, merge the fuselages of Spitfire World War II aircraft with the graceful wings of a butterfly, paying tribute to the Czechoslovakian fighter pilots who served in the British Royal Air Force during World War II. We made our way back to the hotel as the lights started to illuminate the St. Vitus Cathedral overlooking the city. We're starting our day off with a tour of the Jewish quarter. Our guide is Vojta, and he starts off by telling us about the difficult history of the Jews in Prague.
Jews, after the law, they were property of the king. So they were also paying taxes directly to the king, which means that the town hall was never profiting from the presence of Jewish town. And there was constant struggle between the town and the Jewish quarter and Old Town for space. At the end of 17th century, there was a fire. Most of the ghetto was burned down, and then it has lost one third of its surface. Just simply, Jews, they were not allowed to be owners of the land. There are walls around, and the gates which they were closing at night. Of course, it depends on the time. In some areas, it was possible for the Jews to have shops even in the Old Town. And then there are times when just to leave Jewish town you needed a written permit, a passport, just to leave your quarter. The river is another limit. You can see that close to the river there is only the cemetery. It is too dangerous to live there because the floods were very frequent. Only this year we were having 2 floods already, right? So you can imagine that the life was very insecure here.
This is a statue of Judah Ho, a great scholar, rabbi, and spiritual leader of the Jewish community in Prague in the late 1500s. He is also credited with the creation of the Golem of Prague, a creature of extraordinary strength and low intelligence. It was made by the rabbi out of mud, clay, and brought to life by the insertion of magical inscriptions into his mouth. It was originally created to protect the inhabitants of the Jewish ghetto, but became too hard to control, carrying out instructions without thought.
If you wish for something stupid, so he will do stupid things. When Perla asked Golem, bring water from the river, so he was walking with the water, and next morning there was a flood, because he was unstoppable.
Our next stop is the Spanish Synagogue, that has been turned into a memorial for the nearly 80,000 Jewish victims that were killed during the Holocaust in the Czech lands. Also here is an exhibit that focuses on the Jewish children that were incarcerated in the ghettos during World War II. The Prague Jewish Cemetery is small, and the most overcrowded cemetery in Europe and probably the world. It was established in the mid-15th century and was the only place in Prague where the Jewish could bury their dead. It has over 12,000 tombs, but it's estimated that about 100,000 people are buried here. This statue is a memorial to Franz Kafka and depicts a scene from one of his short stories called Depiction of a Struggle. The Old New Synagogue is Europe's oldest active synagogue. Completed in 1270, it still serves as the main synagogue of the Prague Jewish community. On the Jewish Town Hall clock tower, there are 2 clocks. The second one is a Jewish clock, and it has Hebrew letters, and it moves counterclockwise. Built in 1868, on the original site of Prague's oldest synagogue, the Spanish Synagogue, with its stunning interior, is an example of Moorish-style architecture, popular for European synagogues in the mid to late 19th century. The synagogue sat empty for 2 decades in the late 20th century, before being restored and reopened in 1998 as the headquarters of the Jewish Museum in Prague. After the tour, we found a small cafe and had their very satisfying daily soup of cabbage, sausage, and potato. Our next stop is Speculum Alchemiae, an unusual museum with a connection to Prague's alchemy heritage. This rather ordinary building hides a once secret underground alchemist laboratory, rediscovered when the 2002 floods opened up a hole in the street, revealing these underground rooms. We were shown the laboratory, glass-blowing studio, and a room to dry herbs. There are very few original items to the space besides some of the glassware, but they do have an interesting collection and stories presented on the tour. Well, we finished up our day with a beer and some street food, trying one of the potato pancakes we saw yesterday. That was a mistake. It was pretty greasy, and we both felt nauseous afterward. We start our day visiting the Havel Market in the middle of Old Town Prague. It dates back to 1232 and is the oldest market in Prague, but has become more of a tourist stop than a true market. Nearby, we visit another unique site, a statue of King Wenceslas, riding an upside-down dead horse, another creation by David Cerny. We're heading for the National Museum at the head of Wenceslas Square. In front of the museum is a more traditional statue of King Wenceslas. Unfortunately, the square is mostly under construction, but we were struck in awe by the grandeur of the museum as we first entered. The main building is in the Neo-Renaissance style and was built in 1891, with significant restorations finishing in 2018 to mark the centennial of the Czech and the Czechoslovak Declaration of Independence. We start by visiting the Hall of Minerals. The exhibits are very well displayed, moving from one beautiful room to another. The next set of rooms is an exhibit called Windows into Prehistory. There's a lot more to see, both in natural history and modern history of the Czech lands, but we're getting hungry and have a lot more to do. Besides seeing a lot of classical architecture, there are many buildings in the Art Nouveau style as well. Lunch was at a very down-home local place, not even a menu, just items pinned to a board, and no one spoke English. One of the most famous of Dave Cerny's sculptures is the rotating head of the famous Czech writer Franz Kafka. Standing at about 35 feet tall, it consists of 42 independently rotating tiers that rotate for about 15 minutes every hour. Heading back to the hotel, we stopped in at the other St. Nicholas Church, the one just down the street from our hotel in Lessertown. Also built at about the same time, and in the same Baroque style as the St. Nicholas Church in Old Town, we were surprised how much nicer this one was adorned. Okay, no snacks right now, because we have dinner reservations for a medieval dinner and show. Once we show up, we are again escorted down multiple levels to a small room in a sub-basement, which doesn't seem unusual for Prague. Our meal includes drinks and a multi-course dinner, as well as some unusual entertainment. We planned an extra day in Prague because we wanted to stay for the Signal Festival, which starts tonight. We start the day off with a stop at the weekly market in the St. Nicholas Church parking lot. There were a few interesting items, but we were on our way in 20 minutes. We wandered the streets that eventually took us back up to the Prague Castle, where we saw some different views of the city and the iron gates. One interesting shop that we visited was this marionette store. We made our way down to another of David Cerny's sculptures called The Piss. It consists of two urinating men whose streams write out messages. Only one of them was working. The pond is in the shape of the Czech Republic and is Cerny's representation of a typical Czech dialogue where one is making an effort to outscrew the other. Across the street was a gingerbread shop. Like most of the gingerbread we have had, it did not seem to have a very strong flavor, but this chocolate one made a nice snack. This grumpy old Wagnik, called Kaborik, guards the water wheel of the old Grand Priory Mill on the Devil's Stream. In Czech folklore, a Wagnik is a water goblin, a green frog-like creature covered with algae, oftentimes dressed in flamboyant fashion. Some are good-natured, some are mischievous tricksters, but they all like beer. Around the corner is the Lennon Wall of Peace. This started out as an impromptu memorial after John Lennon's death. At its center used to be a portrait of John Lennon, surrounded by quotes from his songs about world peace and freedom. Anyone can inscribe their thoughts on the wall, but since the arrival of democracy in the Czech Republic, the wall has seemed to have lost some of its significance. Another of the 23 artworks by David Cerny in Prague are these, called Mimika, or babies, and represent the dehumanization of society with barcodes replacing their faces. We had another somewhat disappointing late lunch at another locale restaurant before bundling up for our late night at the Signal Festival. This is a light show that's presented at different locations throughout the city. We started off in Old Town Square. This got old pretty fast, and we soon moved on to another location. This one was more interesting, but it repeated about every 5 minutes. We passed by a few more exhibits, such as this one, that we would classify as a poofter. So, with the cold getting to us, we decided to have a chimney cake and call it a night. Tomorrow we're on a sightseeing trip through the Chesnia countryside to visit some of the smaller towns on our way to Vienna.